Letter 12, Art at Florence. Cosimo Rosselli, Ghirlandajo, Beato fra Angelico, Pixetti, later Florentine School, by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Florence contains a multitude of various paintings, which to describe, or even to classify, would demand a volume, and would require a knowledge of the art, the elements even of which I do not possess. I have not the remotest pretension to being a connoisseur, nor do I say, as some have done, I do not know what is called good, but I know what pleases me, giving it to be understood by these words that they have an untaught instinct transcending culture of the student. I believe, in all matters of art, good taste results from natural powers joined to familiarity with the best productions. To read sublime poetry, to hear excellent music, to view the finest pictures, the most admirable statues, and harmonious and stately architecture, is the best school in which to learn to appreciate what approaches nearest to perfection in each. Rio satisfactorily proves that the modern art of painting resulted from the piety of the age in which it had birth. The adoration of images, or if that expression be too strong, the having recourse to images for the purpose of concentrating, vivifying, and exalting the faith of the worshippers, created a demand, to use a phrase of the day, for pictures on religious subjects. At first this was satisfied by paintings of the Byzantine school, to which custom gave sanctity. But when men of eminent piety, gifted with pictorial powers, turned their talents to representing bodily to the eye, the Savior of the world, the chaste sinless Mother of God, or saints, who through their faith form a portion of the hierarchy of heaven, and are admitted by the judge to mediate for their fellow creatures, they depicted all that their souls could conceive of sublime and holy in the face of man, seeking to present. It is with extreme delight that I have viewed some of the works of the elder Florentine painters, who excelled in portraying the human countenance lighted up by the nobler passions. Simplicity and innocence, rapt enthusiasm, or dignified repose, characterize their various productions. It has been remarked that Shakespeare's personages speak the very words which we may imagine that our noble selves would say under the suggestions of certain passions, dispositions, and circumstances. So it may be said that every figure painted by these higher artists looks an individual chosen among our species for nobility of bearing and beauty of countenance, and that their attitude and look strictly belong to them. There is nothing theatrical nor affected, which is the Charybdis, nor anything constrained or inane, which may be termed the Scylla of the art. Among the compositions eminent for the conjunction of the truth of nature and ideal beauty is the fresco of Cosimo Rosselli in the church of St. Ambrosio. The subject is the translation of the miraculous chalice to the episcopal palace. It is replete with figures of various aspect, but all expressive of the sentiment of worship and admiration proper to the occasion. There is a group of women in particular, which, if such lived and assembled in the churches of Florence, show that personal beauty and graceful dignity then existed among the sex in a degree unparalleled elsewhere. But these evidently are not mere portraits, and the painter, though accustomed to associate with a race occupied by nobler thoughts and desires than now for the most part harbor in the brain and heart of women, yet idealized his actual experiences. There is another picture of this age, which to see is to feel the happiness which the soul receives from objects presented to the eye, that kindle and elevate the imagination. It represents the Adoration of the Magi, by Ghirlandajo, in the chapel of an hospital in the Piazza della Annunziata. There is one of the kings standing on one side of the Virgin, which might, as the Apollo Belvedere is said to have done, create a passion in a woman's heart. Where on earth find a man so full of majesty, gentleness, and feeling, there is a charming accessory to this picture. In the background is represented the murder of the innocents, in all its terror, but immediately in the foreground, on each side of the Virgin, kneel two children, the souls of the innocents who died for Christ and are redeemed by him. The attitude of these babes, especially of one, has that inexpressible charm of innocence which words cannot convey, and which since the creation of man, the pencil has seldom been able to depict. Led by the admiration which this picture excited, I visited every other in Florence by Ghirlandajo. They mostly bear the stamp of the power I have mentioned. Vasari, albeit of a different school, praises him highly, but chiefly for the naturalness and truth with which he portrayed the feelings, and speaks of the wonder excited by those effects, and the pleasure they produced in the beholders. Describing one of the paintings in a chapel of the Church of the Santa Trinita, at Florence, representing the death of St. Francis and the grief of the monks, he says, there is one friar who kisses his hand, and it is not possible, in painting, better to portray the expression. And there is besides a bishop with spectacles on, who is singing vespers, not hearing whom is the only testimony that it is a mere painting. Lanzi speaks of his perfection of outline, grace of attitude, truth of ideas, and of his facility and rare diligence. He was the master of Michelangelo, and it is said, envying the talents his pupil displayed, contrived that he should quit painting for sculpture. But this, I have no doubt, is a calumny. He is one of the most prolific among the early Florentine painters. But among his many pictures, I liked none so well as the Adoration of the Magi I before mentioned, and the Life of St. Francis, in a chapel dedicated to this saint, in the Church of the Santa Trinita. The Beato fra Angelico surpasses all his contemporaries in the celestial sweetness he infuses into the countenances of his saints and angels. We may believe ourselves regarding the blessed in the kingdom of heaven, as we look at these creations of a mind cradled in love, charity, and devotion. Fra Giovanni of Fiesole, known as the Blessed Fra Angelico, presents in his life the very type of a Christian ecclesiastic. He gave himself wholly up to piety and good works. His humility was such that when Pope Nicholas V desired to make him Archbishop of Florence, he represented to His Holiness that he did not feel himself formed to govern the many, and implored him to name another more worthy in his stead. It appears from this holy man, says Vasari, that the monks of his time did not desire to obtain those burthensome honors which they did not think that they could worthily fulfill, and were ready to yield them to others whom they judged more capable, as did this truly angelic father, who spent his life in the service of God, and in benefiting the world and his neighbor. And what more can be desired by man than by living holily to attain the kingdom of heaven, and acting worthily to acquire eternal fame on earth? Fra Angelico was no lazy priest. Besides his works elsewhere, Florence abounds with lovely images whose serene and blessed faces breathe the virtues of their author. The delicacy and softness for which he is remarkable never degenerates into insipidity. His pure taste made him conceive the highest beauty, his faith gave him a foretaste of beatitude, and he adorned with these attributes the beings whom alone he consented to represent, the saints and angels of paradise. We had a curious scene in the sacristy of the church of Santa Maria Novella, whither we went to hunt for one of the works of this angelic artist, the reliquaries mentioned by M. Rio, consisting of 2 tablets painted with a series of miniatures, representing the life of Jesus Christ, the Last Judgment, in which the beatitude of the elect appears in all its living ecstasy, and St. Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great, surrounded by their disciples. For a long time the keys could not be found of the closet in which these reliquaries were deposited, and a most active hunt after them was made. At length they came to light, and the tablets were brought out. The Dominican, who took every pains to find them for us, had lately arrived from Rome, and had never seen them. His almost childish delight, as he regarded the inexpressible loveliness of these exquisite miniatures, was highly amusing. Whenever you have to do with an Italian, you do not encounter the doltish ignorance of an English clown, nor the dogged sullenness of a German. He takes pleasure in your pleasure, and interests himself in the objects which are exciting your interest, in a manner at once gratifying to us and honorable to himself. Of a later age is Pixetti, unnamed by Vasari, because, when he wrote, he had not painted the pictures which render him one of the most admirable fresco painters in the world. Florence is full of his works, and every one may be visited with pleasure and profit, for he depicts nature in her truth and yet in her elegance. If that word denotes the power of displaying in the demeanor and attitude, and countenances of men, their souls defecated of every meaner quality, dignified through unaffected self-forgetfulness, animated by charity, beaming with faith. One of his most renowned works is a series of frescoes in the cloister of the convent of the Santissima Annunziata. They represent the conversion, holy life, and death of 7 Florentine gentlemen who dedicated themselves to religion under the name of Servi di Maria. The aspect and bearing of these holy men mark them as gentlemen in the best sense of the word. Men generous, brave, and gentle, and, in addition, animated by earnest benevolence towards their fellow creatures, and lively faith towards the divinity. Perhaps, however, the most admirable of his works is the cupola of a chapel, belonging to the church and convent of Santa Maria degli Anghioli. It is painted in fresco, and represents the saints of the Old and New Testament, The more beautiful portion is the congregation of female saints: Saint Cecilia, the musician; Saint Clara, the nun; Saint Catherine, the bride of Christ. And see, the foreshortening is admirable, the spirit and grace of the attitudes worthy of the highest masters of the art. Such is the spirit that animates the earlier school of Florence. But as painting became more of an art, and grew to represent domestic scenes and portraits, artists broke from the confinement of mere religious subjects, or treated them in a mundane manner. Then it was that their imaginations so degenerated that they had recourse to portraits to represent Christ, the Virgin, and the saints. Some of them even fell so far from the ideal of sinless chastity as to paint their mistresses and women of unworthy life, offering to the worship of the pious the image of mere physical beauty without the superior grandeur of moral excellence. I must confess that any rules, except the immutable laws of moral rectitude, that tend to limit the objects on which man is to exercise his faculty of the imagination, appear to me contrary to the scope of our creation. We are so far from being all born possessed of equal powers of mind, that since the world began there has been scarcely 100 among us capable of the higher flights of the intellect. How few possess, in any degree, the capacity of becoming painters, and far fewer are those who are able to rise to an exalted order of art. We ought to know what the highest is, that those who feel the power should endeavor to elevate themselves to it, but beauty may be found elsewhere, and must not be rejected. Bigotry is ever to be eschewed in all that pertains to man. To confine painters to one class of pictures is to turn some who would be great, if allowed to originate subjects of a lower grade, into tame copyists, and humble, lifeless imitators of the thoughts of others. As well insist that all poets should write hymns and heroic poetry, as that painters should confine the pencil to the delineation of the conceptions of religious mysticism. The genuine school of Christian idealism is, for the present, come to an end, and I confess, as far as I may be allowed to judge, that it strikes me that the Germans of the present day, who are endeavoring to revive it, fall into the same mistake as our sculptors, who employ themselves in imitating the ancients. They are good copyists, but are never original. And what appears to prove this is, that the Germans are not content with endeavoring to reproduce that composed and severe expression, which the earlier painters yet knew how to ally to vitality in its highest sense, but they return to the dry coloring and meager composition, which is the chief defect of the infancy of painting. Still, there can be no question that in poetry, music, or the plastic arts, the ideal must rank above the merely imitative. Those painters who can embody ideas conceived in their purest and most elevated contemplations, far removed from vulgar and trivial reality, are the greatest. Artists, however, are men formed by nature with the peculiar eye to see and represent form and color, and it is not strange that the majority among them should turn to the study of these, and view in the perfection of representing the one or the other the aim of their labors. Thus the study of nature succeeded to the ideal. Art fell lower afterwards and became the copyist of art, and ancient statues grew to be the models from which modern painters strove to gain inspiration, till the uniformity, stiffness, and even deformity thus produced, induced others, who perceived these faults and their cause, to have again recourse to nature. But these remarks tend beyond the limits of my knowledge, or even powers of observation. I have mentioned pictures not much visited except by the curious, just to show the way towards, not to guide you, for I cannot, in your search after pictorial excellence, nor will I long detain you in the more beaten road of the public galleries.